Ready for the interview, and if you get a cue live on the laptop, watch what I'm gonna do. Welcome to the show, let them know we got a point of view. Hey, yo, let's have a combo. Say what you feel, be real, that's the motto. Real talk pronto, Dr. D, PhD, hit the intro. Hold up, wait, gotta be social. Network global, a home for the local. Gotta be social. Network global, a home for the local.
Christine Davies. Davies, right? Is that how you say it?
Mhm.
Perfect. And Christine, thank you so much for being here with me.
Yes, I'm excited to get to talk with you today.
Okay, when I saw your profile on, I think it was one of these sites, Matchmaker or something, I'm going to tell you what pulled me towards you. Okay, I think this is good for people to know. So you said you were a little irreverent and you curse sometimes. And I thought to myself, that's pretty funny. That's actually pretty funny. And I said, wow, for someone in this position, I think it's pretty cool.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I like people to know that I can be both a clergy person as well as down to earth. Sometimes those of us who are ordained as ministers can be a little holier than thou when I think that's not always what is helpful, especially what I really focus on as a hospital chaplain and a spiritual director is being with people when they are going through crisis and all of the emotion that that brings with it and the ways in which it caused them to maybe question their spirituality at times. And so needing someone that can be irreverent, that can curse a little bit, that can really get in the boat with them and process what they're going through, to me is important.
It's funny when I was with my wife earlier today, she was saying that she said, yeah, I think she probably does curse because you can't really be all kind of goody two shoey in that job. My wife was a nurse. So
Yep.
she gets it.
What's funny is sometimes when I've been starting in a new hospital, before people get to know me a little bit, and a nurse or a doctor, someone might curse in front of me, and then they realize, oh no, I just cursed in front of the chaplain. I said, that's okay. I've probably said much worse. Although I do have 2 young kids now at home, and so I try not to curse quite so much in their presence. But yes, being able to express ourselves in all manner of speaking in order to really connect with others.
What is, and we're going to get to your background and how you got into this, but why do you feel like maybe you have I feel like this is a very different way of being and pastoral work than other people. I feel like there's one thing I never identified, and I've been in spirituality and religion my entire life. I never identified with pastors or clergy or anyone who was like unrelatable to me. And part of that was like, just never say anything bad.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who are in congregational ministry, and I think they are often put on a pedestal. And sometimes they want to be on that pedestal. Oftentimes they don't. And it's other people that are having these unfair expectations. But it really varies in terms of what people think they need to present as an image in order to be taken seriously. But I'm of the belief system that our vulnerability can really be what connects us and that authenticity, especially when people are searching and being able to say, I don't have all the answers either.
Yeah.
Let's figure it out together and what that means for you.
Was interesting. The church I've gone to for a really long time is in Las Vegas. And I no longer we live in Colorado, but I still watch the services online and stuff. And I remember one time our pastor was saying, a guy came up to him and was like, oh, I cursed a bunch and I drank some beer watching football. And he said, it's so bad. And the pastor was like, just relax. It's no big deal. It was like, and it's funny that you have to, like, that people have such that feeling that they feel like they can't do that stuff, or the pastor needs to give them permission. And it's very interesting. I felt that very
Yeah.
interesting.
And I see that a lot in my work as a chaplain because I am this almost anonymous presence in someone's life. So I usually don't have a relationship with the patient or the family beforehand and won't after they're discharged. And I think it allows people, there's a term called the intimate stranger, because it allows people to open up and things with me, particular congregation or faith tradition. So for instance, I hear a lot of people talk to me about their anger at God. And they have told me that they haven't shared that with anyone else because they are afraid that it's blasphemy or a sin, or they fear the judgment that might come out from either other members of their congregation or faith tradition or their clergy. And so I think there is something powerful in being outside of the box as a chaplain and a clergy person.
So how did you get into this work? What was it that drew you to hospital chaplaincy?
Yeah, so I grew up going to the local Presbyterian church with my family. I really took to it in the ways that my sisters did not. And so from a young age, I was a pretty precocious kid and was convinced of God's presence in my life and was also convinced that God wanted me to help the most amount of people possible. And I thought the way to do that was going to be through medicine and becoming a physician. And my mother's a nurse, so I think she really pushed that a little bit. And I worked as an EMT in the backs of ambulances. That's where I really learned how to curse. I learned lots of things there from the rest of the folks on the ambulance squad. But it was in being in the back with the patients while we were transporting them to the hospital. I could do minor things like wound repair and administering oxygen, but it was really holding their hands while they were scared, and assuring them that I was there with them and that they weren't alone and that they were going to get the care that they needed. That's the part that I really enjoyed about it. And then around the same time, I became a patient myself. I was in and out of hospitals where it took a long time to figure out what was going on with me medically. It turns out that I eventually got a diagnosis of generalized epilepsy. So I was having seizures, which thankfully are very controlled now. But I was going through this dilemma and this disorientation when I was seeing doctor after doctor, and they didn't necessarily have the bedside manner that I would have liked. And a lot of guesses at the diagnosis were made and lots of medications, and it was very much trial and error. And it was around that time that the church I was attending had gotten a new associate pastor. And she took me out to dinner and just talked to me about my life, about how this was impacting me. And later on, I recognized, I was like, oh, she was giving me that spiritual care, that pastoral care that I now give for other people. That was the first time I got to experience it and saw there's different ways to heal people. So that's a lot of what drew me into it. I went to seminary knowing that I didn't really want to work in a church. I had done some of that, but I like the variety of being with people of no faith tradition or other faith traditions. And every day is intense
I
in
would
hospital
imagine so.
chaplaincy work, and it's usually the worst day of someone's life, often when we're with them. But to me, it's really meaningful. And some of what I do on top of that now is I train people who are wanting to be chaplains. So how to listen better, how to be with people in crisis. And then I also started a spiritual direction practice on the side because I missed getting to know people over time. Like I said before, I'm in people's lives for a very brief amount of time, but getting to see the unraveling of people's spiritual lives and how it unfolds for them over a couple of years is so a beautiful thing.
So why did you not want to work in a church? What was that? What drew you to not be in that environment?
Yeah. And I should say too, I had a side trip of working as a social worker. I was a cognitive behavioral therapist in community mental health, but realized that I missed the spiritual discussion with people. I was talking about other things with them by and large. I've worked in churches and I occasionally will get pulled in to help out. I don't love preaching. I'm more of a writer. I like to write or have informal conversations like this with you. But I think it's a lot of that. It's some of it, I think, has to do with just you have to be a jack of all trades to be really a church minister. You have to be good at so many different things. And you have to handle the plumbing when the toilet clogs up. You have to run
Right.
this committee meeting and that committee meeting on top of doing Bible study, on top of making those hospital visits, on top of preaching and preparing your sermons every week. And for me, I'm like, nope, I like the hospital visits. I would like to spend all my time there.
It's very interesting. And I wonder and changing into something I think that's going on today. And I'm curious about your thoughts about it. What do you make of this large upheaval or change in how people are viewing spirituality and religion in today's culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it probably would help if I defined how I see the two as religion and spirituality, because oftentimes when I walk into a patient's room, when it's just a routine patient that's there that we're making an initial assessment on, not someone that's going through a crisis, I'll introduce myself and they'll say, oh, chaplain, I'm not very religious.
Yeah.
I say, that's okay. What is giving you meaning? What is on your heart today? Because religion is an agreed upon set of rituals and practices and beliefs that's held by the community or a community for the sake of, I would say, communing with the divine. That's how my broad definition of religion. And spirituality is how you connect to and explore the world around you and within you, and how you make meaning and find transcendence. And for some people, religion is how they do spirituality, right? It all encompasses it. For some people, religion is a part of how they make sense of spirituality. And for some people, it is completely separate. So it really varies. And when I'm working as a chaplain and as a spiritual director, I'm trying to meet people where they are in that paradigm. And it is a growing number of people. I think it was in the last count that I saw was in 2021, 29% of people I refer to it in our line of work as SNR. So saying that spirituality is important, but religion is not. And I think there's a whole host of reasons for that and why that number is growing, not least of which, and sometimes as clergy, we don't admit this, but religion can be so problematic. I hear story after story of people who grew up with a religion where there was toxicity, there was abuse, there were power issues. Religions are human institutions that bring all of the baggage of us as humans with it. And then the problem becomes when those issues become internalized so that they are impacting someone's relationship with their spiritual selves or with the divine or God or however one might define it. And so in my mind, I'm not surprised that there is such a critique of religion. And at the same time, I think a lot of people are searching for something and they don't necessarily know what, and not having the framework. And another way I like to define spirituality is that it can be really viewed in three different realms. So it can be viewed as our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others, be that a community or family, and then the relationship with the divine or the transcendent. For some, that's going to be God. For others, that's going to be nature or the universe. And it's really about balancing out all of those three dynamics. And if I'm only focused on myself and not focused on anything else, that's going to cause a problem, or vice versa. And what I'm always looking for when I'm with patients or when I'm with clients in spiritual direction is, where is there a breakage or a rupture in any one of those areas? So as a hospital chaplain, when I'm meeting with patients, if their body is breaking down, they're going through a health crisis, something's going on with them medically, they may not trust themselves. They may not feel like themselves. Their medications may be doing some weird things to them. So there might be a breakage there. They're separated from everyone in the hospital. They don't get to be with their loved ones, even if that is temporary and they're going to be returning home. I was with someone recently who said they hadn't slept apart from their wife in 40 years. And that was going to be the first night that they weren't going to be with their spouse. And then the divine, right? Especially when people are either grieving or having a new diagnosis, that's going to bring up all sorts of thoughts about and emotions toward God or them or to them, however they might define that for themselves. So that's where a chaplain or spiritual director can come in, especially if there isn't any sort of affiliation with a house of worship. Someone doesn't have a synagogue or a shul or a mosque or a temple that they're practicing with. We can help stand in that gap.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And the other thing that kind of drew me to it is, I think there's, at least for me, is you see hospital chaplaincy work in like movies, primarily. If you're not in a hospital regularly, or you're not around people or in those situations, you get it from other sources. And for me, I like to know people who are doing the things that I don't know about, to get it straight from them, because that's, I think, part of a lot of misinformation is we have an idea about something, but then we don't actually know what's happening on the ground.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't know what a chaplain is or does. And so having to explain that, convert them. But it's funny that you mentioned TV shows and movies, because I started watching Grey's Anatomy back, 20 years ago when it first came out, and still watch it. But I'm like, they need a chaplain. The things that they've had their doctors do are actually things that the chaplains wind up doing, something like holding a wedding in a hospital. We do those Not all the time, but I probably do about a half dozen to a dozen every year or two
Wow.
for patients or their family members who are essentially dying and not going to make it out of the hospital and wanting to get married, or they want their mother to get married, to see them get married, and their mother is dying. And we do those all the time, not Meredith Grey. Or we're there when people are saying goodbye to their loved ones, particularly in the ICU. And we're also there when the doctors are notifying someone that their loved one didn't make it as the result of injuries from, say, a car crash. So we're the ones that stay in the room. The doctors do the notification to the family, and then we help the doctors to leave so that we can stay with the family and give them that emotional care and bereavement support.
Wow. That sounds very heavy, like extremely heavy. How do you buffer yourself against with all that emotional energy coming your way? What are some practices you do to keep yourself healthy, energetically, and
Yeah.
physically?
Well, and I'll say this because people often ask me, like, how can you do this? This must be so hard. And it is, but I also don't know the individuals who are going through it. Every once in a while, I may know them for whatever reason, and that makes it even harder. But as we were talking about people, rabbis or ministers or imams working in the congregational setting before, it's hard for them because they have an emotional and tie and relationship when their congregants are going through something that they're having to grieve that too. For me, it is a little easier because I'm already separated out. I am that intimate stranger, so to speak. But yeah, I have a few practices that I recommend. One of the things that I teach, especially to my students, is this concept and that we really have to double the joy that we have in our lives because we are seeing an inordinate amount of suffering, more than anyone should have to see. Your wife is a nurse, probably has had the same experience, right? And so we have to purposefully cultivate joy and happiness and really trying to remember that this is not everything and this is not most people's experiences. I encourage people to make a joy list and come up with simple everyday things that bring them joy and how to focus on that. I'm terrible to watch movies with because I don't like to watch anything dramatic or with grief. I'm like, only something that's funny. I can't do anything because I get enough of that. I have enough of those stories. Occasionally, I do read a lot of books, and occasionally I'll miss the fact that a book is really about grief. But again, that I can usually sit with and find the beauty in it as well. So, really trying to make sure I have activities and people in my life that also help me to stay grounded. Just before we got on this call, I was outside playing. We called it box ball growing up. My kids call it four square or two square.
Yeah.
So, playing box ball for an hour, you really can't think about other things. You're having to just pay attention to where you are. Being physical certainly is something else that grounds me just as a way of getting some of that stress out in that way. And then really trying to turn it off when I can. Taking my vacation days. My staff will tell you I take all my vacation days and trying to get away. And just recognizing so much of what I see is a reminder of how short our lives are and how we are not promised any day. And so, really trying to live more fully in a way that is bringing meaning into my life and the life of my family.
I love that. That's wonderful. And it makes me also think about, I've been thinking about this too. And I don't know this. That's what I'm going to ask you. Is there a difference in maybe like how being a female in this space is different in hospital chaplaincy as opposed to how it has been perceived traditional things in churches where it's been male dominated, male led? What is it like in hospital chaplaincy? And just what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah.
The latter as well.
Yeah. So, I think there's a lot more women in hospital chaplaincy. And I think sometimes because of that reason, because we are the ones that don't always get hired for, I can just speak from the church. I can't speak for, I'm
Yeah.
not going to speak for synagogues or mosques, but because sometimes we aren't the ones getting hired. Or if we are, women are getting hired as associate pastors and not the head of staff or the senior pastor positions. And chaplaincy sometimes has some flexibility of hours with it. So there's more part-time, there's per diem chaplains, there's, lots of hospice chaplains out there as well. And so I think that is an element of it. The times I used to do a lot of pulpit supply where I would go and fill in for a church that was without a pastor. And some of the sexism I remember someone telling me once, introducing me to their congregation. She's the first female minister I've ever seen. And aren't we so lucky we get to stare at her for an hour? as we listened to what she's going to say, I thought, would you say this
Wow.
to a guy? It was very strange. And I think especially what I love about healthcare is that it is, I haven't checked the percentages in a few years. Last I checked, it was 80% women. And I see that true at every level. And so I think there is this atmosphere that is just more accepting of women clergy. Now, most people, when they think of the chaplain, I asked someone once because they said, you don't look like a chaplain. I said, what do you expect a chaplain to look like? And they said, oh, like an old white guy with a collar. And that was what my boss looked like at the time. But I was like, no, we come in all shapes, all sizes. And so it is different to have to introduce yourself over and over to patients and families in a way that you don't necessarily have to in the church setting. But I think to me, I noticed a big difference.
Yeah, it was one of the things for me is why I love having these conversations. And by the way, I would love for more pastors to come on and talk and things like,
I'll see if I can find you some.
I'm telling you, it's better this way. You want to be relatable to people. I think that's one of the greatest things. Spirituality is creating relatable experiences among people. That's what brings people together. And I never liked the whole pastor being on the pedestal thing. I never liked it. Even as a kid, I never liked it. I was like, this is weird, actually. This person doesn't seem like a real person to me. And then as I got older, I started really being like, why are all these people guys? I never liked that either, by the way. And I thought, so I feel like that's kind of part of this whole time we're in is there's a lot of pushback because kind of the old ways of doing things, there's always guys, typically the same ethnicity, the whole thing. People are not into that idea anymore all the time. And I think the church needs to move forward in that. And as the world moves forward, I know things out there makes it seem like it's not moving forward, but it is.
Yeah. And I think in addition to the levels of sexism that are certainly in all of our institutions, but, within the church in particular, I think for the longest time, it was, growing up, the associate pastor I mentioned before, she was really the first female clergy that I knew. And I've worked with a lot of my clients or ministers, and they didn't have even that role model. And so that idea of if you can see it, you can be it. And the seminary that I went to just a couple years ago finally had more women than men in their class. And I think some of that is because it is becoming more to have women in leadership in the field.
Yeah. I mean, I applaud it. I'm a big fan of it. I think there needs to be way more of it going on. And honestly, I think maybe for me as women, people who are different ethnicities, people like myself, I understand the pull on all of those things. Because when you've been underrepresented, you know what that feels no matter what that version of that is. So I root for people who have been misrepresented or underrepresented to be in bigger spaces because we have a lot to offer. We have a lot to offer. And the diversity of our planet is really important, no matter what area you're talking about it is. I think it's just a really important. Yeah, there you go.
Like I said, preaching to the choir. It's a perfect sermon.
A lot of people listening, they may not be feeling that. And that's one thing I like is talking to people and because I have a lot in my work in fitness and working with clients. I remember I had someone I was working with and they were like, what's your hot button topic? I was asking them, they said, oh, I hate organized religion. Well, sure you hear some of this in your work when you're dealing with people and stuff. And I feel it's important for me to be like, all right, I'm gonna help be a good example to not just necessarily change your mind, but just be like, listen, I'm not like that. Whatever you saw, there are other sides of it. And I think too many people see one side and then they don't. That's they make their decision on.
Yeah, I work with a lot of people who have seen the hypocrisy of religion or have been fed a diet of what I would call religious platitudes that have no depth to them. So they've been told things like your loved one died because God needed another angel, right? Which is problematic in so many ways. And when someone is fed that sort of thing, it's going to minimize their own pain that they're feeling. And it's going to set them up for a relationship with God that is not a good one. Because if I'm told that, I'm going to think God's a jerk then. If God took my loved one and this is the kind of the belief system that you're telling me I should follow. And story after story of that. And these are well-meaning people that may be saying some of these trite things, let alone like the abuse that we talked about earlier. And so it's really about helping people to connect to what is meaningful in your life. And a lot of times I feel like when I'm sitting with people in spiritual direction, it's like a ball of yarn, right? And this is their whole kind of religious and spiritual history kind of in a big knotted up mess. And we have to go through and untangle it and say, okay, let's look at this piece of it. What is it that you might believe about God or the divine or the spirit or however you define it? And then we have to unravel it. We have to untangle it, and we might look at it and say, okay, yes, this still fits. It looks a little different. It's not as straight. It's a little curvy now because of it, but this still fits. And there might be another part where we say, okay, this thing that I heard over and over growing up again and again, this doesn't fit with what I believe. I'm going to cut this thread out, and that's not a part of it anymore. And so that type of parsing takes maturity as well as the spiritual maturity. And so, yeah, it is easier to say, oh, this is God's will. No, thank you. I was just writing the other day about someone that told me God forsaken me. And so therefore I returned the favor.
Oh,
Right. And so when people are feeling like they're not connecting, sometimes there is guide you through it.
and that was so well said. That was really well said, the way you said that. I wonder, this is a big question, Christine. Why do you think humans seek spirituality, religion? We've done it our entire history as a species. What is it inside of us that pulls us towards these things that are bigger than us?
And it is a great question. I don't know that I can speak for all of humankind, but I can speak for myself. So I think it is that the wanting to recognize the parts of ourselves that I would characterize as like the still small voice, or Augustine might say, our hearts are restless until they rest in God. So there is an inner working that I've experienced, others I've talked with have experienced, where it is pulling us toward something, but we're not sure what. It's sometimes people refer to it as like a yearning, right? Like or a longing, and where they ascribe that longing to. So I'm of the belief system that we were created with this tendency to turn toward, in my world, God, but other people, they may be turning toward a different thing, um, or feeling that calling toward a different aspect of life. And then I do believe that we were also created to be in community. And so it's not surprising that we have created this religion where we are trying to seek these truths with other people, not just by ourselves. And then there's sometimes where I go different places, certainly on pilgrimages, or even sometimes you said you were gardening. I live on a farm. Sometimes I see it out in my yard where it's just, it's so beautiful here. How could you not believe in God? Especially as we're looking at eclipses and northern lights and all
Yes.
these things that are going on. And again, not everyone has those moments. And even for me, they are fleeting. I don't feel them all the time. But I think there's something where we get taken and transported out of ourselves, and we can be in touch with something so much greater. It's like when I'm outside with my kids and they see the clouds going by so quickly, and they're like, oh, wait, are other people seeing these clouds go by? And recognizing that there's more than is just in front of us in this moment, but we
Yeah.
are in this much larger cosmos. And then this might be a little morbid, but recognizing that we are here for just a second, right, of humanity. And so I think we want to make the most of that and seek meaning about it. So I don't know. That's the best answer. A preacher would probably have a more, tied up sermon for you, but that's some of how I wrestle with it.
I feel like it's more realistic though, more relatable. Like how you said about your kids with the clouds. This happens to me pretty regularly with nature and stuff. The other day I was outside, I was looking at the clouds. I said, look at all this. We're in a globe that's floating in space, like in a vast cosmos. And look at all these animals and everything's life is just teeming with life. And there has to be enough sunshine for things to grow, to live, to change. The seasons. I mean, the moon in an eclipse has to be exactly 400 times the size of the earth in order for an eclipse to happen over the sun. That just doesn't feel random to me. Feels like there's a lot of synergy and a lot of order. I feel the order all the time. And I wonder, how could all this order just be random? That seems impossible. It seems literally impossible. So I always have those moments all the time.
Yeah. I think we are people that are always looking for story and metaphor and reason. And sometimes people will take it and say, oh, okay, this is going to be what I'm putting all my belief in, or these are my values. And it's going to be separate. Sometimes in religion, we might connect in nature, and that is where we find our transcendence. Or we look around and say, of course, God created this. Others may feel that, a lot of people feel it in nature, but others may feel it when they are at a symphony and hearing the music. That might be the experience for them of taking them outside of themselves and recognizing beauty and devastation. Sometimes the music can make you feel all sorts of things. Yeah. So what I like to do is broaden the idea of what is sacred and what is spiritual.
You think that somewhat goes against some of the maybe church-based, maybe more less progressive, I'll say, ideas about church?
Yes, I come from a very progressive denomination, and there are going to be other people that say, absolutely not. You cannot experience God outside of these pews. Now, I think a lot of churches are recognizing that isn't entirely true, right? People lead their lives all week long and not just on Sunday mornings. But I am unique in that I am interested in the individual's experience as well. And that is important in the ways in which they connect. And there are spiritual practices that sometimes take root for some people that don't take root for other people, and encouraging people to think about what is going to work for them, right? For some people, meditation is a way to enter into communion with oneself and with the divine. In Christian circles, that may be something like centering prayer is one that we use
Yeah.
a lot. Others, they're going to need something more tangible, right? Like they're going to need to hold something in their hands, whether that's a cross or prayer beads or a paintbrush, that people are going to connect in different ways and really trying to expand the way that we view that, and not just say it's these hymns that were written in 17, 1800s.
Yeah,
That's the only way that, and I like hymns as to the next
sure.
person, but really trying to think of how do we bring the sacred into the everyday.
I compare it to in my field of fitness. We've done a great job of reaching people who are already fit. We're great
Mm,
at that. We reach about 15 to 20% of people who already love fitness. And we have completely missed the mark on about 80% of people who just are turned off by exercise because it doesn't speak to them in a way that's palatable for them. And I compare that to the church is very similar to that. And
mhm.
like, why does it always have to be in the same place or the same format? Like, why can't it, let's remix this a little bit? And I think that's a big problem is like, if the format's always the same and the location's always the same, you're actually missing out on a lot of other people who may want it. They just don't want it in that baked that way for them.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
this rigidity is what's hurting the church. It's the same thing in fitness. This rigidity on the same things that we do for all fit people are not working for a lot of other people.
Here's another comparison. You'll have to tell me because I I dabble in fitness. I am by no means an expert in it, but I wonder because I've heard people say, "Oh, you should incorporate fitness in your whole life," right? Yes, it's the hour that you're putting in at the gym or the
Yeah.
run or the strength training, but it's also taking the stairs. It's also
Mhm.
making sure you're moving throughout the day and not sitting all day. So I think too, spirituality can be like that. It's not just sitting somewhere on 1 hour a week. It's also what are you doing throughout your day that is harnessing the power of the divine, that is awakening your attention to the fact that you are a spiritual being.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's totally true. Even in a sense that when I do lectures and stuff about fitness, I always separate what's movement, what's physical activity, what's exercise. There's three different definitions of things, but we often
Mm,
in society use them interchangeably as the same thing. And I feel that's very similar what we do spiritually. We use a lot of different terms to try to mean the same thing, but they're actually different. And
mhm.
people, it's much like nutrition. It's not a cookie cutter situation. People feel better biologically with different versions of approaches to nutrition. So why
Mhm.
would I feed everyone the same way for that? And I think there's a rigidity that needs to go away for that. But I think as humans, we struggle with moving on from things that we're so used to, no matter what it
Mhm.
is. We are creatures of inertia. We will do the path of least resistance. If I've been doing this for 20 years, I'm going to keep doing it for 20 years. I don't want to change. And I think sometimes we look at spirituality or religion and think these are sacred things. We cannot change these things. And I push back on
Mhm.
that. I'm like, if you want to actually reach more people, you need to be more flexible. Yeah.
Yes. It's making me think one of the things that they taught us in seminary was for those of my colleagues that were going to be in the church, which was most of them,
Yeah.
was when you first get to a new church as the new pastor, don't move anything for 6 months. Don't move a chair. Don't move a table because it does bring change is hard. And a lot of what I do as a chaplain and spiritual director is I'm with people in change because change brings loss. And then loss brings grief, and things are changing a lot. Sometimes they're changing in big ways. When people are saying their final goodbyes to their loved one, that's a huge change. Sometimes people are changing in ways that those are all changes too that people want, but it still brings an element of loss to it. And then there's some grief to it as well that's hidden in the midst of the celebration. So a lot of what I do and what I train my interns to do is to listen for the different types of losses that are coming up for people, because that can be unexpressed grief in a lot of ways. And I think that's what happens churches on an institutional level, right? Like they're afraid of change because of the loss, because of the inability to tolerate some of the emotions that is going to come with that.
I love that you mentioned that the loss part. That I think it speaks to me. And I think it's like learning something new. It's the inverted U hypothesis. When you learn something new, you're pretty bad at it in the beginning. And then as you start up and you go down on the bottom of the U, you get really bad. And then all of a sudden you start improving and you go back up. And I think it's just this fear of loss it drives people to not change for
Hmm.
that. And that is
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
prevalent regardless of the industry or a path in life. And you see this in relationships with people. It may be better to be with someone else, but you're going to take that L because you're afraid of the
Hmm.
loss. You know?
Hmm. Yeah, we do a lot to try to avoid it,
Yeah.
um, and avoid the pain that may be associated with it.
So what would you say in your job? What's the hardest thing you've had to do as a hospital chaplain?
I think the hardest cases that I have been on have been around death is always hard, but I deal with death all the time. So I am pretty used to it. But when it is a child and when it is a death that could have been prevented, those are the hardest. When it was an accident, when it wasn't something medically that was going on, but it was a fall or a drowning or someone choked on something, those are really heartbreaking, certainly for the families. And then a lot of times what I will do is I'll hold debriefings for the staff. So for all of the staff that were involved in it as well, for the nurses, for the doctors, security, layers upon layers of grief. It ripples out and impacts everyone. Even the parking lot attendant who helped the family come in, just the ways in which those types of really tragic events impacts everyone. I think so those tend to be the hardest ones.
Gosh, that sounds
And
brutal.
knowing it is, yeah, and yeah, so it's an occupational hazard, right? My kids are used to mom refusing to go anywhere till everyone's buckled in. I would cut up their grapes into so small pieces. We have a pool, and I'm wild about water safety because that's the occupational hazard, right? Like knowing that the worst thing can happen because I've seen it happen and just how
Yeah.
devastating it is, certainly for the family, and then also rippling out to the whole hospital community.
Oh my goodness. And that's got to be one of those times too where the family and people don't want to hear, or maybe it was just their time and all
Oh
that
my
stuff. You know
gosh,
what I
it's
mean? What
awful.
a terrible thing to say.
That's why I'm on a mission to get people to stop saying these things. What you can do in crisis, I think, is you show up and you shut up. Because sometimes our words make it worse. Our words can cause harm. And it's coming from people are well meaning. They want to cheer people up. But in some circumstances, there is no cheering people up. There is no making it better. There's nothing that you can do to fix it. And so just acknowledging that and bearing witness to the people's pain. And the bulk of what I do is create a space for people to have whatever emotional experience they may be going through. And a lot of times in those situations, it's just numbness and denial and shock, right? When I'm working with people one on one, longer term, they're going through all sorts of different phases of it as well.
Well, I'm glad you showed up here and you spoke up here about all of this. What a great insight into something that I honestly don't know a lot about. And that's my mission with my show is I would like to learn about things I don't know about and to get
Mm-hmm.
an insider pass to these things. So thank you for sharing your story and the difficult parts of doing what you do, which
Yeah.
cannot be easy. That's
No, it's not easy, but it is still at the end of the day, I find it to be very meaningful. And I should also I sometimes worry that I need a content warning, especially I do a lot of writing about my work. And my husband jokes, he's like, all of your work needs you are a walking content warning, Christine, because you're always talking about these dark and deep things. But just for your listeners, sense of loss or their own sense of wrestling with problems within organized religion, whatever it is, I want them to know there is a space for you, whether it would help to talk it through with a spiritual director or with a clergy. Can't really find a hospital chaplain unless you're in a hospital. So hopefully that won't be the case for any of them anytime soon. But to know that there are resources and people that can journey with you as you ponder some of these questions or really just sit with you in the naming of it and the suffering of it.
wonderful stuff. Please let everyone know some ways they can contact you,
Sure.
Christine, to learn more about you.
Yeah, probably the best place is my website, which is my first name, Christine, my middle initial, which is a V, as in Victor, and then my last name, Davies. So ChristineVDavies.com. If people are interested in working with me individually, they can contact me through there. I also write a weekly newsletter that can be emailed to you through Substack, and you can sign up for that on my website as well, or find a link to it and read through it first and see if that's something that might be interesting to you. I talk about stories as they come up in my chaplaincy work and give tips for different practices to try or how to be a better support to someone that might be going through a crisis.
Awesome. I am so happy we got a chance to connect, Christine.
Yes, this has been so great. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Christine Davies. I appreciate you, Christine. Thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely.